At the outset of this meeting, I should like, on behalf of the Security Council, to express our deepest sympathy to the government and the people of the United States of America on the passing of Ms. Madeleine Corbell Albright. Madeleine Albright had a long and distinguished career in the service of her country, including as permanent representative to the United Nations, where she presided over this very Security Council, and as the first woman to serve as Secretary of State of the United States. I would also like to convey condolences to Secretary Albright's family and her loved ones. In my national capacity as the first female ambassador of my country at the United Nations, I know that many women ambassadors since then owe Secretary Albright an enormous debt of gratitude. Her informal group of women ambassadors, which she dubbed the G7, was an important step for a more inclusive United Nations. Perhaps one day we will see here a G97 where half of the ambassadors are indeed women. And on behalf of the Council, I'd like us all present to stand and observe a minute of silence in memory of Madeleine K. Albright. The 9,002nd meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is letter dated 13th April 2014 from the Permanent Representative of the Russian Federation to the United Nations, addressed to the President of the Security Council, S/2014/264. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representatives of Belarus, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, and the Syrian Arab Republic to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of Item 2 of the agenda. Members of the Council have before them document S/2022/231, the text of a draft resolution submitted by Belarus, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, the Russian Federation, and the Syrian Arab Republic. The Council is ready to proceed to the vote on the draft resolution before it. I now give the floor to those members of the Council who wish to make statements before the vote. I give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Благодарю вас, госпожа председатель. В начале нашей встречи хотел бы отметить, что мы были воодушевлены инициативой наших мексиканских и французских коллег, выдвинувших в начале марта проект резолюции о гуманитарной ситуации на Украине. Однако этот порыв почти сразу же был подмят нашими американскими и британскими коллегами, заявившими, что без осуждения России этот проект им не нужен. Остальные члены западного лагеря были вынуждены взять под козырек. В итоге вместо решения гуманитарных аспектов мы стали заниматься политикой и взаимными обвинениями. А вместо того, чтобы обсуждать и дорабатывать текст, западные страны безосновательно заявили, что Совет Безопасности якобы не может согласовать проект резолюции, гуманитарной резолюции по Украине, представленный Россией. Госпожа председатель, мы категорически не согласны с тем, что Совет не в состоянии принять резолюцию по украинскому гуманитарному досье. Мы выносим на голосование сегодня текст, основанный на франко-мексиканском предложении, однако лишенный какой-либо политизации, аналогичной в этом плане другим гуманитарным резолюциям Совета. В нем были бы весьма заинтересованы ООНовские гуманитарщики на земле, которым мало что даст любая гуманитарная резолюция в Генассамблее. Поэтому, уважаемые коллеги, выбор за вами. Продолжаться ли занимать спекуляциями вокруг оказания гуманитарной помощи Украине, или же принять резолюцию Совета Безопасности, которая станет важным практическим шагом и подспорьем для гуманитарщиков. Благодарю вас.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Madam President. Once again, Russia is attempting to use this council to provide cover for its brutal actions. It really is unconscionable that Russia would have the audacity to put forward a resolution asking the international community to solve a humanitarian crisis that Russia alone created. The United States intends to abstain on this text because, to state the obvious, Russia does not care about the deteriorating humanitarian conditions or the millions of lives and dreams the war has shattered. If they cared, they would stop fighting. Russia is the aggressor, the attacker, the invader, the sole party in Ukraine engaged in a campaign of brutality against the people of Ukraine. And they want us to pass a resolution that does not acknowledge their culpability. We have all seen the pervasive videos of millions of Ukrainian women and children fleeing for their lives. We have seen the images of bloodied pregnant women being carried out of the rubble, including a mother and her baby who tragically died 2 weeks ago. We have seen the shelling of kindergartens, orphanages, and humanitarian corridors, attacks hitting apartment buildings, gas and water pipelines, and a nuclear power plant, shootings of people waiting in bread lines. We have seen cities under siege and corpses in the streets and journalists killed in the crossfire. We have seen shelling by Putin's forces kill a 96-year-old Holocaust survivor in Kharkiv, Ukraine. And if we are to believe Russia's disinformation, these are all movie sets with actors. And we remain deeply concerned as we warned for the third time here yesterday that Russia may be planning to use chemical or biological agents. Russia alone is to blame for the war in Ukraine. And mark my word, Russia will continue to be held accountable for what it is doing to the people in Ukraine. Russia is trying to make this council complicit in its flimsy fabrications by putting forward a resolution that makes no mention of its role as the sole cause of this crisis. And our vote will show that we will play no part in that. Russia continues to block this council from carrying out its mandate. The United States stands with the people of Ukraine. The overwhelming majority of United Nations member states stand with Ukraine. Our chorus of voices is why Russia's cynical effort to use this institution to spread disinformation and propaganda won't work. As the vote today will show, Russia's disingenuous efforts to deny the truth of its actions will continue to fail. I want to thank you, Madam President, for offering a moment of silence for the amazing Madeleine Albright. And if I can end with a quote from Madeleine, Secretary Albright once warned, "Take it from someone who fled the Iron Curtain. I know what happens when you give the Russians a green light. And that is what we will do today if we pass this resolution. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of the United States for their statement. I shall put the draft resolution to the vote now. Will those in favor of the draft resolution contained in document S/2022/231 please raise their hand? Those against? Abstentions? The result of the voting is as follows: 2 votes in favor, 0 votes against, 13 abstentions. The draft resolution has not been adopted, having failed to obtain the required number of votes. I now give the floor to those members of the Council who wish to make statements after the vote. I give the floor to the representative of France.
Madame la Présidente, la France n'a pas voté en faveur du projet de résolution présenté par la Fédération de Russie parce que ce texte constitue une manœuvre de Moscou pour légitimer son agression contre l'Ukraine. La Russie prétend se soucier de la situation humanitaire en Ukraine alors qu'elle piétine chaque jour les conventions de Genève et le droit international humanitaire. Non contente d'entraîner le peuple et l'économie russe dans une guerre qu'ils n'ont pas choisie, la Russie cherche à imposer des réalités alternatives et à instrumentaliser ce Conseil. Soyons clairs, si la Russie se préoccupe tant du sort des populations civiles, elle n'a qu'une seule chose à faire: arrêter son offensive et retirer ses troupes d'Ukraine. Au lieu de cela, la Russie espère obtenir du Conseil de sécurité un blanc-seing pour lui permettre de poursuivre sa guerre. Cette manœuvre ne trompe personne. Le résultat de ce vote l'indique très clairement. Les membres de ce Conseil n'entendent pas laisser la Russie instrumentaliser les Nations Unies et le droit international humanitaire. Madame la Présidente, la France et le Mexique ont négocié de bonne foi un projet de résolution au Conseil de sécurité avec l'objectif d'obtenir une cessation immédiate des hostilités et d'apporter des réponses concrètes à la catastrophe humanitaire qui se déroule en Ukraine. Face à la réalité de l'obstruction russe, nous avons décidé ensemble de porter cette initiative à l'Assemblée générale. Un groupe transrégional a élaboré un projet de résolution. L'Assemblée générale doit jouer son rôle et demander une cessation immédiate des hostilités, indispensable pour protéger les populations civiles, mettre un terme à cette guerre et exiger le plein respect du droit international humanitaire. Je vous remercie.
I thank the representative of France for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Madam President. Since Russia invaded Ukraine 27 days ago, 3.5 million refugees have fled the country, and another 6.5 million people have fled their homes within Ukraine. 12 million Ukrainian people now need humanitarian aid. In Mariupol, Russia first bombed the maternity hospital. Then Russia bombed the theatre where children were sheltering from attack. Over 100,000 people in Mariupol are now under medieval siege. There is no drinking water or food for those trapped in the city. The UK is in no doubt that there is a humanitarian crisis in Ukraine. As the Secretary-General said yesterday, the Ukrainian people are enduring a living hell. the UK's offer of emergency and humanitarian aid to support Ukraine now totals around £400 million to help deal with the immediate need. And the UK is in no doubt that Russia's invasion is triggering a wider humanitarian crisis. Worldwide, food, energy, and fertilizer prices are skyrocketing, threatening, as the Secretary-General said, to spiral into a global hunger crisis. As Solzhenitsyn reminded us, it is high time to remember that our first allegiance is to the human race. So the UK will not vote for any resolution, either here or in the General Assembly, that does not recognise that Russia is the sole cause of this unfolding humanitarian catastrophe, and therefore key to ending it. Russia's draft called for all parties to respect international humanitarian law. It ignored that Russia is committing war crimes. Russia's draft called for the protection of civilians, including women and children. But it omitted that Russia is bombing maternity hospitals, schools, and homes. If Russia cared about the humanitarian situation, it would stop bombing children and end their siege tactics. But they haven't. The General Assembly will soon vote on a resolution that makes clear that the only way to end this humanitarian crisis is for Russia to end its war. A resolution tabled not by the aggressor, as we have here, but by the victim. High time indeed to remember that our first allegiance is to the human race. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Albania.
Thank you, Madam President. Tomorrow will mark a month since the start of the war of Russia against Ukraine. Since the very first day, this war has been senseless, unjustified, unprovoked, illegal. It must stop. Every second it lasts is one too more. Instead, it is becoming deadlier every day. Mariupol, mercilessly pummeled block by block, has become the true face that Russia is presenting to the world. A world that is refusing it, that is isolating it, and it's holding it responsible. Dear colleagues, we know the cause of this devastating humanitarian situation in Ukraine. We know who is responsible. Therefore, we did not believe that Russia needed to propose a resolution to the Security Council to call itself for a ceasefire for an aggression it initiated for no reason, to oblige itself not to bomb civilians, homes, schools, and hospitals as it is doing every hour, not to kill mothers and their babies, not to force children, girls, and women to dramatically leave their homes. We did not fall for such a trap. We did not accept such a mockery, and the result just showed it. If Russia is worried to protect civilians in Ukraine, as the international humanitarian law firmly obliges it, it has to abide by the Geneva Conventions. If Russia is in the slightest way concerned by the responsibility to protect, it has to come to senses, stop its aggression, withdraw its troops, pack and go home. Instead, the more it stalls there, the more aggressive it becomes and the deadlier it turns out. Russia is the sole and unique cause of this terrible humanitarian situation it created out of its obsession. It cannot share this responsibility with the victim, Ukraine, or anyone else. Therefore, because this text, despite its misleading title, is a mountain of hypocrisy, because we consider it spineless and useless, Albania did not vote in favor of it. And I thank you.
I thank the representative of Albania for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Ghana.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Ghana continues to be deeply concerned by the humanitarian situation in Ukraine following the Russian Federation's invasion of Ukraine since 24 February 2022. We accordingly remain committed to supporting all genuine efforts to address the suffering of the Ukrainian people throughout the entire territory of that country's internationally recognized borders. We have had to abstain from the draft resolution submitted by the Russian Federation on the humanitarian situation in Ukraine because we did not believe that the resolution spoke to the settled position of the international community on the cause of this humanitarian catastrophe, nor the requirement for an immediate and unconditional cessation of hostilities, which are necessary building blocks to establish a credible framework for a humanitarian effort that can be considered neutral, impartial, and independent. Building consensus on how to tackle the worrying consequences of the war in Ukraine has unfortunately eluded this Council, but as the Secretary General recently suggested, the United Nations is more than the work done within the Council. We accordingly salute the bravery of the gallant men and women of the United Nations and other humanitarian agencies who continue to work in the dangerous environment in Ukraine to bring hope to the many victims of this war. We encourage the efforts in these trying times for the evacuation and safe passage of civilians, as well as the delivery of food, medicine, and other essential services to those in critical need who have been caught up in cities under siege. In concluding, we urge the parties to return to the path of diplomacy and dialogue in resolving their concerns and emphasize that the interests and safety of the Ukrainian people should be prioritized and must be at the forefront of the actions of this Council and all other international actors. I thank you very much for your kind attention.
I thank the representative of Ghana for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Mexico.
Gracias, Presidenta. Procedo a explicar la abstención de México en esta toma de acción sobre el proyecto de resolución presentado por la Federación de Rusia. Empiezo por referirme al proceso. Durante varias semanas, Francia y México llevamos a cabo consultas de buena fe, con ánimo constructivo y transparente, sobre un proyecto de resolución humanitario que permitiese al Consejo expresarse y asumir su responsabilidad sobre el conflicto en Ucrania. Este proceso permitió un intercambio franco de posiciones con la mayoría de los miembros del Consejo de Seguridad, con el propósito de encontrar un texto equilibrado que pudiera contar con el apoyo necesario para ser adoptado. Después de dichas consultas, nos quedó claro que no estaban dadas las condiciones para alcanzar dicho acuerdo. Curiosamente, fue a partir del anuncio que hicimos México y Francia el pasado 14 de marzo de llevar esta iniciativa a la Asamblea General que tiene en su agenda el tema a discusión por virtud de su resolución 377 que invocamos aquí en este Consejo el pasado 27 de febrero, que fue entonces cuando la Federación de Rusia decidió, sin previo aviso, presentar un texto alternativo para ser votado al día siguiente. Este proceder contrasta con la disposición al diálogo con la que hemos conducido el proceso desde su inicio. Si bien la delegación rusa pospuso la votación del texto y lo ha pospuesto y reagendado en varias ocasiones, el proyecto no tomó en cuenta ninguna de las posiciones presentadas por México y para fines prácticos por ningún otro, toda vez que el proyecto puesto en azul el 16 de marzo únicamente cambia el orden de 2 palabras con respecto a la versión original. De manera puntual, por lo que respecta al contenido sustantivo del proyecto, quisiera aclarar que, aunque pareciera que contiene algunos de los elementos del borrador desarrollado originalmente por Francia y México, se trata de una versión editada que tergiversa el sentido de varios de los párrafos. El equilibrio que comenzaba a forjarse después de más de 2 semanas de negociaciones y que sirvió de base para el texto que se discute ahora en la Asamblea General, quedó excluido. El texto en cuestión no contiene alusión alguna al artículo 2.4 de la Carta de la ONU sobre la prohibición de la amenaza o el uso de la fuerza contra la integridad territorial y la independencia política de los estados. Tampoco hace referencia al cese inequívoco de las hostilidades. Y pensamos que ambas son premisas fundamentales para detener la crisis humanitaria que se vive en Ucrania. Un texto omiso en ese sentido no responde ni a la realidad en el terreno, ni a la evolución de las apremiantes necesidades de la población civil. Concluyo, Presidenta, reiterando la disposición de mi delegación de mantener nuestra plena disposición al diálogo franco, constructivo, con todas las delegaciones y en todos los espacios pertinentes de las Naciones Unidas, con el único propósito de asegurar que existan las condiciones en el terreno que permitan que la asistencia humanitaria llegue a quienes la necesitan de manera expedita, segura e irrestricta. La prioridad para México en este terrible conflicto ha sido y seguirá siendo, en ejercicio pleno de nuestra soberanía, la acción humanitaria, la protección de civiles y el respeto al derecho internacional humanitario. Gracias, Presidenta.
I thank the representative of Mexico for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Ireland.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, Ireland abstained in this afternoon's vote for a clear and simple reason. The resolution tabled by the Russian Federation does nothing to ease the humanitarian suffering of the Ukrainian people. Indeed, the draft before us today failed to call for the very thing that would end civilian deaths, that would stop the destruction of Ukrainian cities, that would facilitate safe and unhindered evacuation of civilians and humanitarian access. That is, this resolution failed to call for an immediate and unconditional end to hostilities. It was simply a cynical abuse of the multilateral system by the aggressor in this war. If the Russian Federation wishes to take action to relieve the humanitarian suffering of the Ukrainian people, it should end this war now. Madam President, Ireland could not vote in favour of a resolution that purported to address the humanitarian situation, but which did not recognise the cause of the humanitarian crisis that is engulfing Ukraine. A humanitarian crisis with global consequences that is causing food insecurity on other continents. We remain horrified by the humanitarian suffering being endured by millions of people in Ukraine and the plight of those forced to leave their families and their countries and their country. Ireland's priority is to address and alleviate the deteriorating humanitarian situation in Ukraine, and we are committed to working constructively with all those who share this goal. Finally, Madam President, it is a matter of deep regret that we, members of this Council, have not been able to act collectively to address the suffering of the Ukrainian people. We have been prevented from doing so by the actions of the Russian Federation, the aggressor in this war. It is shameful that a permanent member of this Council has acted in this way. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Ireland for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Norway.
Thank you, President. Let me start by restating a fundamental principle. A party to a conflict cannot expect to be perceived as neutral. In the spirit of the UN Charter, they should not neither be the author of Council drafts, nor should they take part in voting on the very same conflict to which they are a party. And no one can be in doubt of the Russian Federation status as a party. Yet, in meeting after meetings and in numerous letters, Russia expects us to accept their accounts, reports, and views as if they were coming from a neutral place. President, For nearly a month now, Russia has continued its reprehensible invasion of Ukraine. Civilians are being attacked, injured, and killed, even as they try to flee to safety. Homes, schools, hospitals are being bombed by Russia as we speak. What we have before us today is not a neutral and balanced humanitarian resolution. It is a distraction. Russia's war against a fellow UN member state is a clear violation of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine, of international law, and the very principles of the UN Charter. If the Russian Federation cares about the protection of civilians in Ukraine, it can stop this senseless war. That is the way to bring an end to the humanitarian catastrophe in Ukraine. Russia can end this war, and they should do it now. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Norway for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Brazil.
Thank you. Madam President, Brazil remains gravely concerned with the humanitarian situation arising from the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Increased reports of civilian casualties, including children, as well as the growing number of refugees and internally displaced people, reveal that the situation continues to deteriorate. As the main organ for the maintenance of international peace and security, the Security Council should be able to address the humanitarian situation in Ukraine, despite different political views. Nonetheless, any humanitarian action taken by this Council must be meaningful and should not reflect partial views of the conflict. A truly consequential resolution on humanitarian issues should be able to promote real impacts on the ground, helping facilitate agreements, strengthening adherence to international humanitarian law, setting the conditions for the safe passage of civilians and the rapid, safe, and unhindered access of humanitarian assistance to those in need, among other elements. A call for the cessation of hostilities is an integral part of such a humanitarian effort. Equally important, any Council resolution on this matter should be open to an inclusive discussion among its 15 members, following a constructive process in which all efforts are made to accommodate the views of member states, in good faith, with true intention to contribute to a lasting solution for the protection of civilians. The draft resolution presented today by Russia presents many important elements for the protection of civilians. However, it lacks a reference to the cessation of hostilities, one of the reasons why Brazil abstained on today's vote. It also fails to recall the principles of distinction, proportionality, necessity, and humanity, as well as the general obligation to take all feasible precautions to avoid and minimize injury to civilians and damage the civilian objects. Brazil will continue to engage constructively in any process towards a humanitarian resolution on Ukraine, as long as the initiative proves to be meaningful, inclusive, and transparent. Members of the Security Council, no matter how distant their views, have an obligation to negotiate in good faith with each other towards a cessation of hostilities and a durable solution. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Brazil for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of China.
谢谢主席女士。主席女士，乌克兰危机爆发后，人道局势持续恶化，外溢影响不断扩大，引发国际社会广泛担忧。安理会已就乌克兰人道问题举行多次讨论，有关平民伤亡增加、难民人数上升、人道救援严重不足的报道令人痛惜。同许多成员一样， 中方一直呼吁最大限度避免平民伤亡，尽一切努力保障基本人权需求、人道需求，同时也一直主张安理会履行好维护国际和平与安全的首要责任，在乌克兰人道问题上发挥应有作用。中方就乌克兰人道局势提出了6点倡议，并向乌克兰红十字会提供多批人道救援物资。我们欢迎其他各方提出的任何有助于缓解和解决乌克兰人道危机的倡议和举措。过去几周，安理会就法国、墨西哥以及俄罗斯各自提出的决议草案进行了反复磋商。中方一直积极参与，始终呼吁各方聚焦人道问题，超越政治分歧，尽最大努力寻求共识，为应对当前的人道危机做出积极努力。安理会最终未能达成最广泛的一致，这令人遗憾。国际社会普遍希望尽快实现停火，这也是中方的强烈期待。我们认为，在推动停火止战的同时，安理会也应本着积极、务实和建设性态度，并行不悖地应对好人道危机。中方对有关决议草案投赞成票，根本出发点是推动国际社会高度重视乌克兰人道局势，呼吁有关当事方就人道问题加强协调，切实保护平民，特别是妇女、儿童等脆弱群体的安全，为人员撤离和人道救援行动提供便利。我们欢迎联合国就人道援助发挥协调作用，支持乌克兰危机协调员工作，鼓励联合国人道协调办公室、联合国难民署等机构积极开展行动，动员国际社会向所有有需要的人提供无差别的人道救援，帮助乌克兰和周边国家安置难民和流离失所者。联大第46182号决议确立的人道、中立、公正原则，应在人道救援行动中得到严格的遵守。主席女士，中国奉行独立自主的外交政策，一贯从事情本身的是非曲直出发，本着负责任的态度，确定我们对有关问题的立场主张。在乌克兰问题上，中国始终坚持各国主权、领土完整都应得到尊重，联合国宪章宗旨和原则都应得到遵守，各国合理安全关切都应得到重视，一切有利于和平解决危机的努力都应得到支持。乌克兰危机为世界带来严峻挑战，目前的关键是当事方展现政治意愿，尽快通过谈判找到妥善解决办法。国际社会应为和平创造空间，为政治解决留有余地。当务之急，要呼吁各方保持最大克制，避免平民伤亡，防止出现更大规模的人道危机。长久之道在于摒弃冷战思维，不搞集团阵营对抗，逐步构建均衡、有效、可持续的全球和地区安全构架。中方将继续致力于劝和促谈，为和平发声，为和平尽力。谢谢你，主席女士。
I thank the representative of China for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Gabon.
Madame la Présidente, nous avons pris la parole cet après-midi à l'Assemblée générale et nous la reprenons maintenant pour préciser et souligner notre position de principe sur l'humanitaire. Notre position ne variera pas parce que nous croyons aux valeurs qui sous-tendent l'humanitaire. Nous pensons que les conventions de Genève de 1949 et leur protocole additionnel qui encadrent l'humanitaire ne doivent pas être combinés avec toute posture politique, tactique ou stratégique. Nous nous sommes abstenus et nous nous abstiendrons chaque fois que l'humanitaire sera l'objet de division ou de fragmentation de l'humanité. Nous nous abstiendrons chaque fois que notre perception sera celle d'une instrumentalisation de l'humanitaire à des fins inavouées. Nous croyons que l'humanitaire doit être le consensus permanent du pacte social de l'espèce humaine. Je vous remercie.
I thank the representative of Gabon for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Благодарю вас, госпожа председатель. Прежде всего, хотел бы поблагодарить те страны, которые поддержали и коспонсировали эту резолюцию. Состоявшееся голосование вывело на чистую воду всех тех, кого политизация гуманитарного досье важнее содействия ООН в оказании гуманитарной помощи нуждающимся украинцам. Мы слышали сегодня из уст некоторых делегаций, в частности делегации США, что они не хотят принимать никакого участия в резолюции, которую предложила Россия. Ну что же вы тогда в таком случае проголосовали, воздержались по этой резолюции? Голосовали бы против? Мы же прекрасно понимаем, каковы истинные мотивы вашего воздержания. Не применять право вето, которое в ином случае вы применили. Нам странен экскурс истории в то, как развивалась ситуация с этой резолюцией из уст представителя Мексики, который сказал чуть ли, что мы неожиданно выставили эту резолюцию на голосование, в то время как первоначальные инициаторы драфта, который мы в целом поддержали, за исключением политизированных пассажей, неожиданно, без исчерпывающих консультаций членов Совета, в частности с нами, вынесли в Генассамблею. Лишь после этого мы предложили свой драфт для рассмотрения Совета. Давайте еще раз посмотрим, какие действия и мероприятия наши западные коллеги по Совету не дали согласовать по политическим причинам. Наш проект резолюции содержал в себе такие важные элементы, как призыв к установлению режима прекращения огня и учреждению гуманитарных пауз в целях проведения безопасной эвакуации гражданского населения, а также предоставление возможности беспрепятственного выезда с территории Украины всем желающим без дискриминации по какому-либо признаку. Призыв не подвергать атакам объекты критической инфраструктуры, призыв не размещать тяжелую военную технику в жилых кварталах и густонаселенных районах, обеспечение защиты гуманитарного и медицинского персонала, надлежащая защита раненых и больных, гуманное обращение с пленными, защита гражданского населения, в особенности женщин и детей. Поэтому, уважаемые коллеги, когда вы сетуете в этом зале или с трибуны Генеральной Ассамблеи, что какие-либо из перечисленных мною пунктов не выполняются, мы вам будем напоминать, что они были перед вами, но вы по политическим причинам отказались за них голосовать. У вас был выбор, и вы его сделали. Мы сегодня снова услышали из уст некоторых делегаций обвинение России в подготовке применения химического и биологического оружия на Украине. Мы снова слышали фейки, которые нами неоднократно опровергались, которые стали нарицательными по поводу того, что происходило в Мариуполе, по поводу бомбардировок, по поводу убийства людей в очередях. Я не буду все это перечислять, мы неоднократно об этом говорили. К сожалению, никто этого не слышит и не слушает. По поводу химического и биологического оружия, пользуясь случаем, я хочу еще раз сказать, что это невообразимое обвинения в отношении России, поверьте, мы имеем другие средства ведения боевых действий, мы не нуждаемся в применении химического и биологического оружия. Обвинять в этом Россию просто недостойно. Тем более, что мы это оружие давным-давно уничтожили. Отсутствие гуманитарной резолюции Совета Безопасности, безусловно, существенно осложнит жизнь гуманитарщиков на земле, позволит украинской стороне и дальше игнорировать требования по установлению режима прекращения огня для вывода людей по гуманитарным коридорам. Киев будет продолжать использовать гражданское население в качестве живого щита и, вопреки международному гуманитарному праву, размещать тяжелые виды вооружений у больниц и детских садов. Что касается доставки гуманитарной помощи, то мы будем стремиться решать эту задачу, как решали ее последние 8 лет для населения Донбасса, о страданиях которого вы предпочитаете не вспоминать. Мы сегодня слышали, как представитель Великобритании напомнил нам, что мы одна человеческая раса. Согласен с этим, к сожалению, многие страны, включая Великобританию, вспоминали об этом в других эпизодах. Я не буду все их перечислять. И мне кажется, сегодня неподходящий момент, чтобы цитировать кого-то. Мы жалеем о любых жертвах в конфликтах. Любая человеческая жизнь бесценна. Но я мог бы, но не буду сегодня напоминать, что говорили представители стран, которые в том числе сидят сейчас за этим столом, по поводу гибели мирных жителей, включая детей, в массовом количестве, в других конфликтах. На всех подконтрольных российским военным территориях жители уже обеспечиваются предметами первой необходимости, продуктами питания, и убеждены, что по мере реализации задачи специальной военной операции ситуация будет там улучшаться. Мы призываем вас не политизировать гуманитарную тематику. Сожалеем о том, что Совет Безопасности не смог принять резолюцию, которая бы способствовала решению этих вопросов. Тем не менее, рассчитываем на то, что мы и те члены международного сообщества, которые искренне в этом заинтересованы, будут делать все возможное, чтобы облегчить гуманитарную ситуацию на Украине и страдания гражданского населения. Благодарю вас.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for their statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the representative of the United Arab Emirates. All of us here acknowledge the necessity of addressing the humanitarian crisis in Ukraine. In less than a month, more than 3.5 million people fled to neighboring countries such as Moldova, Romania, Poland, and their generosity we must recognize and appreciate. Furthermore, amid the continued fighting within Ukraine's borders, 6.5 million people are displaced, often without access to basic necessities. We also recognize the donor community's robust response to the UN's humanitarian appeal, and we were encouraged by the dialogue between the UN, Ukraine, and the Russian Federation, which led to the first humanitarian convoy reaching Sumy in the country's east on 18th March. It is precisely this kind of coordination that we hope to encourage and see formalized soon, to help those most in need safely and in accordance with international humanitarian law. Nevertheless, we believe there is a crucial role for the Security Council, in line with its responsibility for maintaining international peace and security, to tangibly respond to the crisis. Therefore, we carefully studied all the products brought to this Council by members, including the draft resolution tabled by the Russian Federation, which includes substantive responses to the humanitarian needs in the country. We endorse its calls to allow safe passage without discrimination, unhindered access to humanitarian aid, and the demand that international humanitarian law is protected. Ultimately, however, we abstained from the vote because we would have liked to see, 1 month into this conflict, a call for a nationwide cessation of hostilities, and a text that garnered the full support of Council members. The continued fighting precludes the robust aid operations we hope to all see in Ukraine, not least of which because it risks the safety of humanitarian workers. We also would have preferred greater clarity on the full application of international humanitarian law and with regards to elements that may be misconstrued to imply a political position that falls outside the scope of a humanitarian resolution. But meanwhile, building on the dialogue that led to the Sumy convoy, we must encourage agreement on other technical steps to alleviate humanitarian suffering. For example, on civilian evacuation, access to aid, and windows of silence. Such measures will provide much-needed respite after 4 weeks of fighting and may also lay the groundwork for a more comprehensive humanitarian response as part of a negotiated settlement. We believe this Council needs to rise to the occasion by adopting a dedicated compromise product that contains elements we can agree on, including a call on the parties to comply with their obligations under international humanitarian law, including in relation to the wounded and the sick, missing persons, and the protection of combatants and non-combatants. While agreement was not possible today, the Council cannot abrogate its responsibility to maintain international peace and security. We must work in good faith and try our utmost to help all those in need on the ground today. The UAE stands ready to aid those efforts with the full urgency that this work deserves. I now resume my function as President of the Council. The representative of the United States has asked to take the floor to make a further statement.
Thank you, Madam President. The Russian PR asked why we decided to abstain and not veto. To be honest, it was not necessary to veto, and I don't think the resolution that was put before us was worthy of the U.S. using its precious veto power. 13 members of this Council abstained, and that was all that was required to defeat this resolution. In addition, I want to add that we don't need this farcical resolution to provide humanitarian assistance. The United States has provided more than $600 million in humanitarian assistance to the Ukrainian people, and we will continue to provide as much assistance as is required both to Ukraine and to the neighboring countries who are generously hosting and supporting the Ukrainian people. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of the United States for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Mexico.
Gracias, Presidenta. Brevemente, ya que el representante permanente de la Federación de Rusia hizo una referencia directa a mi delegación, le reitero que estamos abiertos al diálogo que nos permite encontrar soluciones comunes, al diálogo constructivo, al diálogo franco, para ver la mejor manera de que este Consejo apoye a la protección civil y garantice la ayuda humanitaria a quienes más lo necesitan. Gracias, Presidenta.
I thank the representative of Mexico for their statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.
do a short stakeout. Okay?
Good evening, everyone. We are delivering this joint statement on behalf of France and Mexico. The humanitarian situation in Ukraine is getting worse by the hour. Men, women, children are being killed. A quarter of the Ukrainian population has left their homes. Among them, 3.5 million people are seeking refuge in neighboring countries. 90% of refugees are women and children. Civilian and medical infrastructures have been destroyed. The immediate priority is the cessation of hostilities and full respect for international humanitarian law, human rights, and refugee law. The protection of civilians is imperative. Humanitarian access must be ensured as a matter of urgency. The draft resolution presented by the Russian mission to the Security Council didn't respond to these emergencies. In particular, Russia must commit to an immediate cessation of hostilities, as it is the only way to protect the population.
As you know, for more than 2 weeks, France and Mexico engaged in good faith discussions on a draft resolution with all members of the Security Council, calling for a cessation of hostilities and respect for international humanitarian law. The humanitarian situation, as you know, has only worsened since then, and many UN member states have expressed their willingness to participate in these efforts. That's why we informed that we had transferred our initiative to the General Assembly. And the draft GA resolution presented this morning is the result of an inclusive process elaborated by a cross-regional group. It reflects a balance that takes into account proposals from countries from all continents and has the support of the Ukraine. The General Assembly must play its part, call for an immediate cessation of hostilities, and demand full respect for international humanitarian law. Our text is action-oriented, and we trust it will enjoy a wide support of UN members. Thank you.
Ambassador, does the South African text contemplate your success? It was submitted just when the Security Council meeting started. You have a response?
Good afternoon, everyone. As you know, we've just come from a Security Council resolution where we voted on a resolution proposed by Russia. Let me say at the outset, the UK is in no doubt that there is a humanitarian crisis in Ukraine. We've seen the numbers of people fleeing from Ukraine, internally displaced, and the wider global impacts on food, energy and commodity prices. That's why the UK has already given £400 million to support the humanitarian effort. But the resolution that we saw today was a cynical effort by Russia to exploit the crisis which they have caused. Their resolution called for respect for international humanitarian law, but overlooked the fact that they are committing war crimes. Their resolution called for the protection of women and children, but overlooked the fact that they had bombed the hospital in Mariupol and the theatre in Mariupol. Their resolution called for a ceasefire, although we know that the last time they called for a ceasefire, Russia breached it within hours. Their resolution did not call for the one thing that would work, which is that Russia needs to stop its invasion of Ukraine. Thank you.
Ambassador, were you surprised by Chinese vote on this? This is a change of their position in support of Russian draft.
This is the first time that China has voted in support of a Russian draft on Ukraine since Russia invaded Ukraine. The ambassador gave an explanation of vote, and you'd need to talk to them about what led to that.
Ambassador, are you optimistic that you will get tomorrow 141 vote or more, given the fact that today the Security Council, 13 countries abstained? And also, how do you read the fact that Russia insisted on voting today, despite the fact that probably they knew, or do you think they underestimated the vote at the Security Council?
I think Russia has consistently misplayed its hand here and seriously underestimated the consequences of what it's done and the international perception of what it's done. They tabled this resolution over a week ago, and they kept it on the table and rolled it forward. And we saw the result today. Only one country supported Russia. And tomorrow, as I was clear in the General Assembly today, the UK will vote in support of Ukraine. They are the victims in this appalling invasion and the appalling humanitarian crisis, and they will be the ones that we will support in the General Assembly tomorrow, and we hope that many other countries will do so likewise. You've seen the number of co-sponsors from across the regions of the UN across the world, and I think that's a very important signal of how we see that. Thank you.